The faint crackle of the fire pit was the only sound breaking the silence as I stared at my wife, Emily, laughing across the yard. Her head was tilted back, a glass of wine in her hand, her lips curled into a radiant smile that had once made me feel invincible. Tonight, though, it made my stomach churn. Something was wrong. It wasn't the typical wrong, like the kind that comes with a forgotten anniversary or an overdue apology. No, this was deeper, like a splinter buried too far under the skin to dig out but sharp enough to remind you it's there with every move. I had noticed it earlier in the week. Her phone would vibrate late at night with messages she'd swipe away before I could glance over. She'd hum unfamiliar tunes in the shower and leave for errands, dressed like she was headed to a gala. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh and call me paranoid, planting a quick kiss on my cheek as if her lips could erase my doubts. But now, here in the soft glow of the backyard lights, I caught something that twisted my gut. She wasn't just laughing, she was leaning, closer than anyone would with a stranger, her hand brushing the arm of some guy I didn't know. His laugh echoed hers, easy and unguarded, the kind of laugh you share when there's nothing to hide. Except I knew better. There was always something to hide. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking, reading into things. Maybe. God, this is unbearable. Emily's voice cut through the buzz of the party, sharp and low, directed at my parents who stood stiffly beside her. I hadn't even noticed them until now. My dad shifted uncomfortably, gripping his drink like it might save him from whatever she was about to say next. My mom's face, usually soft and warm, was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. Don't tell him, Emily continued, her words quick and deliberate. He'll move back in when I take everything in court. He'll just make it worse for everyone. So, let's keep this between us, all right? I stopped breathing. There was no mistaking her tone, confident, calculating, dripping with the kind of arrogance that comes from knowing you've already won. My parents didn't answer. My mom's hand trembled as she raised her glass to her lips, avoiding Emily's gaze. My dad looked away, his jaw tightening. I wanted to step forward, demand an explanation, but my feet wouldn't move. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, half-truths, and Emily's recent behavior. Court. Everything. What the hell was going on? Emily turned back toward the party, her expression smoothing into the perfect mask of a doting wife and mother. She spotted me watching from the shadows, her eyes locking onto mine for a fraction of a second. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, just smiled. That smile. I had loved it once. Now, it felt like a blade, twisting deeper with every second I stood there. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the usual excuses, a full day of work, the kids' antics, or even the minor squabbles that happen in any marriage. No, this time, my mind was consumed, replaying Emily's words over and over. Don't tell him. Take everything in court. Those weren't words of someone protecting a relationship. They were a declaration of war. And the worst part? She said it with the ease of ordering a glass of wine, as though dismantling our life together was just another task on her to-do list. By dawn, I had convinced myself it couldn't be what it sounded like. Maybe there was context I'd missed, something I didn't understand. Emily had always been sharp-tongued, sometimes cruel without realizing it, but this felt deliberate. Calculated. She wasn't careless with her words, she chose them like weapons. I needed answers, but I wasn't going to get them by storming in with accusations. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school, kissed them on their foreheads, and told them I'd see them later. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal, like I was playing a part in someone else's life. Emily was still in bed when I returned home, sprawled across the sheets like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, half hoping she'd wake up and offer me some shred of reassurance that I was wrong about everything. Instead, she groaned, pulled the blanket tighter, and muttered, "Don't forget the dry cleaning today." No good morning. No glance in my direction. Just another order, barked without looking up. It was then I realized something, I was invisible to her. A ghost haunting my own home. And if I didn't do something now, she'd make good on her whispered promise. I wasn't going to let that happen. By mid-morning, Emily had gone out, errands, she claimed, but I'd stopped believing her excuses. I made a decision. Something in her words last night had struck a deeper fear in me, one I hadn't wanted to face. The way she had spoken to my parents, so sure of herself, so dismissive of me, it was more than just plotting for divorce. There was something else lurking beneath it all. Something I needed to uncover. I started small. I went to her closet and opened the drawers she always kept locked. She'd claimed it was to keep the kids out, but the excuse had always felt flimsy. I had never pushed the issue, until now. I rummaged through her things, careful not to leave a trace. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Clothes, makeup, receipts for things I didn't recognize but didn't seem out of place. Then, at the bottom of one drawer, I found it, a stack of envelopes, all addressed to her. Different names, but the same return address. A man's name. My stomach twisted. My hands trembled as I opened the first envelope. It wasn't romantic, nothing explicit, but it was personal. Too personal. Discussions about plans I knew nothing about. Financial arrangements. Mentions of meeting up. One line stood out in particular: once the paperwork is finalized, you'll be free of him. Just stick to the plan. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I read the words again, hoping I'd misinterpreted them, but they were clear. She wasn't just planning to leave me, she was setting me up. And she wasn't doing it alone. I sat there for what felt like hours, the envelopes scattered around me, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. But as the shock began to fade, something else took its place: resolve. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. Not until I had everything I needed. But one thing was clear. She thought she was in control, that she could manipulate me, blindside me, and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. Emily came home late that afternoon, breezing into the house with a bag of groceries and a hollow smile. I watched her move, so confident, so composed, as if she hadn't just shattered the foundation of everything I thought we had. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. I couldn't let her see the storm brewing inside me. Not yet. Over dinner, the kids chattered about their day while Emily played the part of the perfect wife and mother. She asked about homework, laughed at their jokes, and even stole a bite off my plate with a playful smirk. It was sickening. She was an actress in a role she'd mastered, and I was her audience, forced to sit through a performance I now knew was a lie. I excused myself early, claiming I needed to work on a project in the garage. In truth, I had a plan to put into motion. The envelopes I'd found earlier were just the beginning, I needed more. And I knew exactly where to start. Emily's phone. She had always been protective of it, keeping it locked and close by. But tonight, she'd left it charging in the living room while she tucked the kids into bed. My hands trembled as I picked it up, a mix of guilt and adrenaline coursing through me. I knew her passcode, it hadn't changed in years. I tapped it in, and the screen unlocked with a soft click. Her messages were extensive. Hundreds of texts, group chats, and photos. But one thread stood out immediately, a conversation with the same man whose name was on the envelopes. His contact name was just an initial, T, but the messages left little to the imagination. Did you talk to them? Are they ready to cooperate? Emily, they're nervous, but they'll stay quiet. He's clueless. Good. We're almost there. Just a few more steps, and you'll have everything. Emily, can't wait. He's been unbearable lately. My grip tightened on the phone as I scrolled further. It wasn't just about the divorce or the money. There was something darker here, something calculated and cruel. The photos hit me next. Pictures of my kids, smiling at school events, playing in the backyard. But the captions were what chilled me to my core. We need to confirm before it's official, one message read. No mistakes. Confirm what? My stomach sank as I stared at the words, a sickening suspicion clawing its way to the surface. I needed proof, concrete, undeniable proof of whatever they were planning. And I knew where to get it. The next morning, I made an excuse to leave early. Emily barely noticed, too busy scrolling through her phone at the breakfast table. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening as I drove to the nearest testing lab. I didn't want to believe it, but the messages had left me no choice. I handed over the samples, one for each of my kids, and asked for expedited results. The receptionist didn't bat an eye, just told me they'd call within 24 hours. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions at work, barely hearing a word anyone said. My phone felt like a ticking time bomb in my pocket, every vibration making my heart jump. By the time I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, humming one of those unfamiliar tunes again. She smiled at me, her expression carefree. "You look tired," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Rough day." I stared at her, the weight of everything I'd uncovered threatening to crush me. But I forced a smile, matching her tone. "Yeah. Long one." She turned back to the stove, and I watched her, my mind spinning with possibilities. She thought she had everything under control, but the clock was ticking now. Whatever she was planning, I would find out. And when I did, she'd regret ever underestimating me. The call came the next morning, just as I was about to head out for work. I had barely slept, my mind stuck in a relentless cycle of dread and anger. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I froze, staring at the screen as if it might explode. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew exactly who it was. "This is Dr. Weiss from the lab," the voice on the other end said, calm and professional. "We've completed the tests you requested. Are you available to go over the results now?" I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. "Go ahead." The doctor hesitated for a moment, and that pause told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "I'm sorry to inform you, but based on the DNA analysis, there is no paternal match between you and the samples for all 3 children." The words hit me like a freight train. My vision blurred, and I had to steady myself against the counter to keep from collapsing. No match. All 3 kids. Not one. Not a mistake or a fluke. A lie. My entire life, my marriage, my family, was built on a lie so massive it was almost impossible to comprehend. "Sir." The doctor's voice pulled me back to reality. "Are you all right?" I hung up without answering, the phone slipping from my hand onto the counter with a dull thud. My mind was a storm of emotions: rage, heartbreak, betrayal, disbelief. I thought about the late nights rocking my kids to sleep, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the school plays I'd cheered at. It was all real to me, but now it felt like a cruel joke, like the universe had been laughing behind my back this whole time. Emily. Her face flashed in my mind, not as the woman I married, but as the cold, manipulative stranger I'd started to see in the past few days. She had known all along. Of course she had. And yet, she had let me pour my heart and soul into a life that was never truly mine. Worse, she was still playing me, still plotting to take everything and leave me with nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. Instead, I felt something darker settle over me, a resolve so sharp and clear it almost scared me. She thought she had me cornered, that she could pull the rug out from under me and walk away unscathed. But she didn't know what was coming. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Emily was at the table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone like it was just another normal day. She glanced up as I entered, offering a distracted smile. "You're up early," she said, her tone light. "Want some coffee?" I stared at her for a moment, fighting the urge to say everything, to unleash the fury boiling inside me. But I held it back. Not yet. Not until I was ready to make her pay for every single lie. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Coffee sounds good." As she turned to grab another mug, I watched her closely, every movement, every gesture. This was the woman who had shattered my world, and she didn't even have the decency to flinch. It was then I realized something: Emily wasn't just selfish or deceitful. She was dangerous. And I needed to dismantle her plan before she could finish what she'd started. By the time I left for work, I had a plan. It wasn't fully formed, but the pieces were falling into place. I didn't just want to stop her. I wanted to destroy her, to take everything she thought she'd won and leave her with nothing. Because she had taken my life from me. And now, it was my turn. I spent the rest of the day carefully assembling my plan, each step like a piece of a puzzle that would ultimately reveal Emily for who she truly was. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of it. No, this was about justice, about making sure she could never hurt me or anyone else ever again. My first move was to secure my position. Emily thought she had me blind, vulnerable, ready to be dismantled in court. But she didn't know I was already 2 steps ahead. That evening, after dinner, while she was out for one of her errands, I locked myself in the office and began making calls. The first was to my lawyer, a no-nonsense bulldog of a woman named Grace who didn't flinch when I laid out the situation. "Let me get this straight," she said after I finished. "You've got DNA tests proving you're not the biological father, evidence of an affair, and she's planning to take you for everything in court." "That's right," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. There was a pause, then a low chuckle on her end. "Well, she picked the wrong guy to mess with. I'll start drafting the paperwork. But listen, if she's as manipulative as you say, don't tip your hand yet. Let her think she's still in control. We'll play the long game." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Next, I reached out to a private investigator. If Emily had secrets, I needed them all. The envelopes, the texts, even the DNA results, they were just the surface. I needed to know the full depth of her betrayal, and if this guy, T, was in on it, I wanted him exposed too. By the time Emily returned home, I was calm, collected, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing beneath the surface. She walked in with that same smug confidence, humming under her breath as she set her purse down. "Busy day?" I asked casually from the couch, my tone deliberately neutral. She glanced at me, slightly startled but recovering quickly. "Yeah, just errands, nothing exciting." Liar. The next few days played out like a game of chess, each of us making calculated moves, though she had no idea I was in the game. I let her believe I was oblivious, that I was still the husband she could control with a well-timed smile or a dismissive wave of her hand. But behind the scenes, I was gathering ammunition. The PI worked faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, he sent me a file that made my blood run cold. Photos of Emily meeting T at a hotel. Records of joint accounts I didn't know existed. Messages that went beyond plotting the divorce, they were talking about liquidating assets, moving out of state, starting fresh without me. And the most damning piece of evidence? A conversation where she outright admitted that the kids weren't mine. "He'll figure it out eventually," she had written. "But by then, it won't matter. We'll be long gone." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with fury. They had planned everything, down to the last detail. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for, me fighting back. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I checked our joint accounts. Large withdrawals had been made in recent weeks, amounts that couldn't be explained by groceries or routine expenses. She was draining our savings, bit by bit, likely stashing it away in one of the accounts she'd set up with T. That was when I decided it was time to strike. The night before I made my move, I lay awake in bed, listening to Emily's even breathing beside me. I thought about the years I'd spent with her, the memories we'd built, the life I thought we were creating together. And I realized something that surprised me, I didn't feel sadness anymore. Just resolve. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies and schemes would go unnoticed until it was too late. But she had underestimated me. And tomorrow, she'd learn the hard way that I wasn't the man she thought she could destroy. When she woke up the next morning, I was already gone. The first domino had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. That morning, I executed the first part of my plan. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just precise and calculated, like dismantling a bomb one wire at a time. I started by freezing our joint accounts. Every dollar she hadn't siphoned off was now locked down, inaccessible to her. It wouldn't undo the damage she'd already done, but it would stop her from taking more. Then I made the call to Grace, my lawyer. She had already drafted a motion to subpoena the hidden accounts and assets Emily had been stashing away. With the DNA results and the investigators' findings, we now had enough evidence to flip her strategy against her. Grace assured me that once we filed, the court would see her for what she was, a liar and a fraud. But the best part? Emily wouldn't know what hit her until it was too late. By the time I got to work, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had in weeks. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was controlling the narrative. I ignored Emily's texts that morning, the usual pointless chatter she used to maintain her facade. She was too comfortable, too certain I was still in the dark. Let her think that. But things came to a head faster than I expected. That afternoon, Emily called me, not a casual check-in, but a panicked, frantic call. "Hey, did you freeze our accounts?" she asked, her voice sharp and accusing. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my lips. "Yeah," I said evenly. "I did." There was silence on her end, and I could practically hear her brain scrambling to piece together what was happening. "Why the hell would you do that?" she snapped. "We need that money for bills, for the kids." For a moment, I almost laughed. The audacity of her pretending this was about the kids, about responsibility, when I knew exactly where that money was going. "We'll talk about it when I get home," I said calmly, hanging up before she could say another word. When I walked through the door that evening, Emily was waiting for me in the living room. Her arms were crossed, her expression a mix of anger and feigned confusion. The perfect performance. "What's going on?" she demanded, her tone dripping with indignation. "Why would you freeze the accounts without telling me?" I dropped my bag by the door and stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel the weight of it, to understand that the ground beneath her was shifting. "Because I know," I said finally, my voice low but firm. Her face flickered, just for a second. A crack in the mask. But she recovered quickly, shaking her head with a scoff. "Know what? You're being ridiculous." I stepped closer, holding her gaze. "I know about the accounts you've been hiding. The withdrawals. The hotel meetings with T. And I know the kids aren't mine." That last part landed like a punch. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening slightly before she snapped it shut. For the first time, she didn't have a quick comeback. She started, but I cut her off. "Save it," I said, my voice sharper now. "I've heard enough lies. You think you can walk all over me, take everything, and leave me in the dirt. You don't even care about the kids, do you? They're just pawns in your little game." Her expression hardened, the guilt replaced by something colder. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone icy. "And if you think this little stunt is going to stop me, you're wrong." There it was. The real Emily. No more fake smiles or feigned innocence. Just the ruthless, manipulative woman who had been plotting behind my back for years. "Stop you?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Oh, Emily, I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just getting started." Her confidence wavered for the first time, but she didn't back down. "You won't win," she hissed. "You don't have the guts for this." I stepped closer, leaning in until we were inches apart. "Watch me," I said, my voice low and deadly. "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." I left her standing there, stunned and furious, as I walked upstairs. My heart was pounding, but I felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. She thought she could control me, but now, she was the one scrambling. And this was only the beginning. Emily didn't waste any time. The next morning, I noticed subtle signs of her trying to regain control, small, manipulative acts meant to throw me off balance. She was back to smiling at me like nothing had happened, sliding her hand over my shoulder as I sipped my coffee, pretending we were still the picture-perfect couple. But I wasn't biting. I could feel her watching me closely, waiting for a crack, some sign that she could exploit. She didn't know I had already sealed every escape route, every angle she might try to use. This wasn't a game of cat and mouse anymore. I had flipped the board. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from Grace. "She's starting to move," she said without preamble. "I just got word from her attorney. She's requesting an emergency hearing to contest the account freeze." I grinned. "Perfect. Let her try," I said. "We're ready." "She's going to fight dirty," Grace warned. "But so are we." I filed the motion to subpoena the hidden accounts and the financial transactions with her partner. She said the word with such disdain it felt like a knife twisting. "It'll put her on the defensive." "Good," I replied. "Let's make sure she stays there." That evening, I decided to up the stakes. I hadn't confronted her fully yet, I wanted her to think she still had some semblance of control. But I wasn't going to let her rest easy. Not anymore. When I walked into the house, Emily was in the living room, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in hand. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile meant to disarm, to charm. You're late, she said lightly, as if she hadn't spent the day scheming behind my back. Busy day, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I sat down across from her, locking eyes. I had a meeting with Grace today. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Oh, she said, her voice carefully casual. About what? You already know, I said, leaning back in my chair. The accounts, the hidden money, the DNA results. It's all coming out in court, Emily. You've lost. Her face froze, her usual poise cracking under the weight of my words. She set her wine glass down with a sharp clink, her eyes narrowing. You're bluffing, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You don't have anything. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed in the room. Bluffing? That's funny, coming from someone who's been lying to me for years. But go ahead, Emily. Keep telling yourself that. It'll make your fall that much harder. She stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You don't understand, she snapped. You think you're in control, but you're not. You never were. I got to my feet, towering over her, my calm demeanor only fueling her frustration. Maybe I wasn't, I said evenly. But I am now. And you're going to watch as everything you've built on lies crumbles around you. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the surface-level panic she used to manipulate others, but something deeper. She realized she wasn't facing the same man she thought she could destroy. Before she could respond, I turned and headed for the stairs, leaving her standing there, seething. The ball was in her court now, but every move she made would only tighten the noose I'd carefully set around her plans. Upstairs, I pulled out the file from the investigator and started reviewing the next steps. There was one more card I hadn't played yet, one final blow that would leave her and T with nothing. And when the time came, I was going to make sure it hit hard. The next morning, I moved into the final phase of my plan. Emily thought she could intimidate me, wear me down with her venomous arrogance, but every calculated step she took only pushed her closer to the edge of the cliff I'd built for her. This wasn't just about stopping her anymore, it was about exposing her, making her face the full weight of her betrayal. The court hearing was set for the afternoon. Grace had ensured everything was airtight, the frozen accounts, the evidence of her hidden assets, the DNA tests, and the damning details about her affair with T. But I wasn't stopping at legal measures. This needed to be personal, something she'd never forget. Before heading to the courthouse, I made one last stop, my parents' house. I hadn't confronted them yet about what I overheard at the barbecue, and I needed to know the truth. If they had been complicit, even unintentionally, I had to hear it from them. My dad opened the door, his expression tense as if he already knew why I was there. We need to talk, I said, stepping past him into the living room. My mom sat on the couch, wringing her hands. Her eyes darted nervously as I stood before them, arms crossed. You both knew, I said, my voice steady but sharp. Didn't you? My mom let out a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. We didn't know everything, she said quietly. Emily told us you were having problems, that she was trying to protect the kids. Protect the kids? I snapped, my voice rising. She's been lying to all of us. Those kids aren't even mine. The words echoed in the room, heavier than I expected, and I watched the color drain from their faces. She told us it was complicated, my dad said, his voice trembling. We didn't know about the DNA. She said you'd get violent if we interfered. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Violent? She's the one tearing this family apart, and you bought every lie she sold you. My mom broke down, sobbing into her hands. My dad reached out to her, but his expression was one of deep regret. We didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice barely audible. We didn't know what to do. I stepped back, shaking my head. You had a choice. You chose her lies over me. I hope you can live with that. Without waiting for a response, I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. They were pawns in her game, just like I had been, but their betrayal cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Still, there was no time to dwell on it. I had a battle to win. At the courthouse, Emily was already there, dressed to kill in a sharp blazer and heels, her face a mask of confidence. T was there too, sitting off to the side, his smirk making my blood boil. They were so sure of themselves, so certain this was their victory lap. Grace greeted me with a firm handshake, her confidence infectious. "Let's do this," she said, leading me into the courtroom. The hearing began, and as expected, Emily's lawyer tried to paint me as the unreasonable, controlling husband. They claimed I froze the accounts out of spite, that I was trying to cut off support for the kids. It was a good performance, but it didn't hold up long. Grace stood, her presence commanding. "Your Honor," she began, handing over a stack of documents. "The accounts were frozen to prevent my client's wife from continuing to siphon funds into hidden accounts she established with her lover, who is present in this courtroom today." She turned sharply toward T, her words hitting like a whip. The room shifted as whispers spread through the audience. Emily's composure faltered for the first time, her face tightening as the judge reviewed the evidence. But Grace wasn't done. She laid out everything: the DNA results, the secret meetings, the financial records. By the time she finished, Emily's mask had completely shattered. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering furiously, but it was useless. The judge looked directly at Emily. "Mrs. Marshall, this evidence is damning. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Emily hesitated, her eyes darting between me and T. Then, to my astonishment, she stood up. "He's a manipulative liar," she shouted, pointing at me. "This is all some pathetic attempt to punish me because I'm leaving him." The judge banged his gavel, silencing her outburst. "Mrs. Marshall, sit down," he said firmly. "Your actions speak for themselves." It was over. The accounts would remain frozen, the hidden assets would be seized, and the court would decide custody later, though I already knew she wouldn't win that battle. As we left the courtroom, Emily caught up to me in the hallway. Her face was red with fury, her voice a venomous hiss. "You think you've won? You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." I leaned in close, my voice calm but deadly. "I already won, Emily. You just haven't realized it yet." I walked away, leaving her and T standing there, their perfect plan in ruins. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of her downfall. But as I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Emily's rage didn't end in the courthouse hallway. Over the next few days, she escalated her tactics, calling, texting, and leaving venomous voicemails, each one more unhinged than the last. She alternated between begging and threatening, her usual charm replaced by desperation. "You think this is over," one voicemail hissed. "You're pathetic if you believe this is the end. I'll take you for every cent you have, and I'll make sure everyone knows the kind of man you are." Her words rolled off me now. I wasn't the man she thought she could break anymore. With Grace and the private investigator working in tandem, I had fortified my position. Emily was cornered, and it was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. But the final nail in her coffin came sooner than expected. The private investigator called me with news that almost made me laugh out loud. "We've got him," he said. "Your wife's lover, T. He's been using her to fund his own side ventures. Turns out, he's got another woman, and a child she doesn't know about." I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" As a heart attack, the PI replied. "We've got evidence. Bank transfers, photos, the works. He's been playing her just as much as she's been playing you." It was too perfect. The woman who had built her entire scheme on lies and manipulation was being conned by her own partner in crime. And now, I had the proof to blow it all wide open. That evening, I called a family meeting. The kids were upstairs, oblivious to the storm raging between their mother and me. Emily stood in the living room, arms crossed, her expression a mix of irritation and suspicion. "What is this about?" she snapped, clearly unnerved by my calm demeanor. I held up a folder, thick with documents from the investigator. "This," I said, tossing it onto the coffee table, "is about the truth. All of it." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the folder but refusing to touch it. "I don't know what you're trying to prove," she said coldly, "but I'm not playing your games." I smirked. "Oh, this isn't a game, Emily. This is reality. Go ahead, take a look. It's all there, the accounts you hid, the DNA results, and, my personal favorite, your lover's other life. Did you know he has a kid? Or were you too busy scheming to notice he was doing the same to you? Her face went pale. For the first time, she was speechless. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the realization hitting her like a freight train. She reached for the folder with trembling hands, flipping through the pages in silence. Her breaths grew shallow as the evidence stacked against her, page after damning page. "You're lying," she finally choked out, though her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I said, stepping closer. "Go ahead, call him. Ask him yourself. Or better yet, let me call for you. I'd love to hear what he has to say." She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. For the first time in our entire marriage, she looked small, powerless. She wasn't the confident, manipulative woman who had always been 2 steps ahead. She was just exposed. "I trusted him," she muttered, more to herself than to me. I let out a bitter laugh. "That makes 2 of us, doesn't it? The difference is, I'm walking away from this stronger. You've got nothing left." Her mask crumbled completely then. She dropped the folder onto the table, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her lies had finally crushed her. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned in, my voice cold and firm. "I want you out of my life. No more lies, no more schemes. You sign whatever papers Grace puts in front of you, and you walk away. You get nothing. No house, no money, nothing. Because that's exactly what you deserve." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of pity. She had burned every bridge, and now she was drowning in the ashes. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't just erase me." I straightened, staring her down. "I didn't erase you, Emily. You did that to yourself." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to face the ruins of her carefully constructed life. Upstairs, I sat with the kids, helping them with their homework and pretending, for their sake, that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew the war was over. And I had won. In the weeks that followed, Emily's world unraveled completely. True to her nature, she fought back at first, scrambling to salvage whatever pieces of her plan she could. But every move she made only tightened the noose. Grace and the PI ensured that her hidden accounts were seized, and the court froze her remaining assets. She had no money, no support, and nowhere to go. As for her lover, his betrayal was the final blow. When Emily confronted him, likely in a fit of desperation, he cut ties immediately. The man who had once been her partner in crime turned on her without hesitation, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. The last I heard, she had tried to reach him again, only to find that he had vanished, taking what little remained of their ill-gotten gains with him. When the court proceedings ended, the judge awarded me full custody of the kids. Emily had been so consumed by her schemes that she hadn't even attempted to fight for them. It was clear to everyone, even her attorney, that she wasn't fit to be their mother. The kids didn't seem to notice her absence much, they had grown accustomed to her emotional distance long before I had. The divorce was finalized quickly. Emily signed the papers without protest, her spirit thoroughly broken. I kept the house, the savings I had managed to protect, and, most importantly, my dignity. She walked away with nothing but the consequences of her own actions. One day, weeks after everything had settled, I saw her for the last time. I was at the park with the kids, watching them play on the swings, their laughter filling the crisp autumn air. Emily was sitting on a bench nearby, her hair unkempt, her clothes wrinkled. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew, lost, defeated, and utterly alone. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in her gaze I had never seen before, regret. But it didn't stir anything in me. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. She had made her choices, and she was living the life she had built for herself. I turned back to the kids, focusing on their joy, their energy, their innocence. They were my priority now, my reason to move forward. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from Emily, but from the lies and manipulation that had poisoned my life for so long. As we left the park that day, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. Emily was still sitting there, staring at the ground, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look up as we walked away. And I didn't look back. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. I had lost so much, but I had gained something far more valuable: clarity, strength, and the knowledge that no one would ever take advantage of me again. The past was behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the future looked bright. Emily had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she destroyed herself. And I had walked away victorious.